Are we good?
Subhash?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, lovely.
It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here for the first Tech Tuesday. Thank you everyone for journeying through this brutal cold. Well, it isn't that brutal cold, but it was a sunny day. Thanks everyone for being here. Today is the first of a series of Tech Tuesdays that Subhash and his company Technoplag, which is a global venture builder, has started. And I'm very happy to be here and to welcome you here. For our main event today, I wanted to invite our two distinguished guests, Dr. Mike Short, CBE, and Dr. Chris Moore. And I can promise you this will be an amazing discussion, because when I first met Mike, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet. He straight away asked me a question for which I'm still thinking an answer for, and a very interesting question around technology. So I'm pretty sure that you'll have a very interesting conversation. And let me kind of make myself scarce and invite both of you to come and please have this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, perhaps we should start with some introductions, but before we even get to the introductions, I would like to say a personal thank you to Subhash for organising what I think will be a fantastic series of events in the coming months. The idea of bringing people who understand, who love technology and are concerned about where technology is going for the future is not new. But I think to bring the right group of people to have a really useful and beneficial discussion is not that easy to do. And I think, as you probably found out during the early part of the networking, there is a great group of people in the room. So please make use of that later on. So my name, as you understood, is Chris Moore. I'm a technology specialist working for the Department for International Trade. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that I support companies. I do two things essentially. I support companies that are looking either to come to the UK from overseas to set up their business and to grow. I also work with larger companies who are already here and help them to expand. But on the flip side, I also help UK companies to be successful internationally, so help them to export. And I cover right across the technology spectrum, so particularly focusing in areas like AI, data science, enterprise, cloud, IoT, smart cities, data infrastructure, data centers, and cybersecurity. So quite a lot of different aspects of tech. But this evening, we are very privileged to have Dr. Mike Short with us, who is our Chief Scientific Advisor. And I'm going to let Mike introduce himself and to explain a little bit about the role of the CSA. Mike.
Thanks so much, Chris. Good evening, everybody. Great to see you. Hope you can all hear me at the back. Call me Mike. Don't worry about the Michael formalities or the CBE or anything like that. I've had a history of technology for some 40 years, and I've been a Chief Scientific Advisor in DIT for some 5 years. One of the things that you should also remember is that Tech Tuesdays are held every month, so don't be put off by us at the first one here. The next one will be on the 7th of February, and you'll have even more valuable speakers at the next one of these. Before I became a Chief Scientific Advisor, I chaired 3 industry associations. I chaired the UK Mobile Data Association that launched texting and SMS in the UK, as well as mobile email. I also chaired the Global GSM Association some 25 years ago and was on its board for 7 years. And also chaired and was president of the IET, the Institution of Engineering and Technology. So I've had a broad-based technology background, but mainly in electronics and telecoms. One of the things they told me at the interview when I became a CSA was, how well connected are you? Well, from those 3 industry associations, you can probably tell I'm fairly well connected. You'll see I've got some 10,000 plus connections on LinkedIn. Happy if any of you want to link into me afterwards to see what else I've done. Some of the things I do as Chief Scientific Advisor involves supporting people like Chris and some of the companies who want to invest in the UK, but also sometimes lead missions overseas to help export from the UK. That sometimes requires collaboration around technology, sometimes collaboration around networking. And one of the really powerful things about this group is networks are absolutely vital when it comes to helping trade. Networks to a conference, networks to an exhibition, networks to exchange knowledge, they're absolutely vital. And some of the people who come to the UK really value these networks. So just think about it from that networking point of view. If you've not met people you've not met before, please do so before you leave. Start to make the most of the networks, both here and other networks that exist. One of the other things I do is sometimes give some support to ministers. And our Secretary of State within DIT, she is a new minister, so she's still settling in, I would say. But occasionally I get asked to deputise for a minister or a junior minister when leading a mission in the UK or overseas. That's a privileged position because you get to help some of the government-to-government contacts, which are sometimes useful in terms of oiling the wheels of trade, oiling the wheels of collaboration. So it's not always done minister to minister, it's sometimes done by senior civil servants such as myself or even Chris. So sometimes we can really help move trade quite a lot. Shall we talk a little bit about one of the events we've got coming up? Shall we? Yeah.
Why don't we do that?
Yeah. So one of the events we're supporting at the end of February is something called Mobile World Congress. I used to be chairman of the GSM Association. It may well hit close to 100,000 people going to it in Barcelona at the end of February. Let's see. Post-pandemic, the numbers are going up. But the number of UK companies we counted at the end of December was close to 100 out of 800 stands there. So we DIT will be supporting 100 UK companies going to Mobile World Congress. Why? Because sometimes it's useful to have a UK pavilion. Why? It's sometimes useful to have a reception. Why? It's sometimes useful to make introductions with a minister present. Sometimes the handshaking can be really helped in a practical way. Now clearly Mobile World Congress does so much more than what I've just summarised, but they're just some things that we do from a DIT.
And just going beyond that, we also work very closely with some other key events. So for instance, there was quite a big DIT team that participated in Web Summit recently, which is very much a focal point for startup companies, not just from the European region, but from all over the world. And of course, the other big event that takes place every year in the UK is London Technology Week. London Tech Week has been going for quite a long time, but the DIT presence and the role that we have to curate some of those events, to bring in speakers from all over the world, and also to support companies that are participating is something we've been doing for some time. And many, many companies, particularly smaller companies that I've spoken to, have said, well, we came to the UK for London Tech Week to find out what was going on. We learned so much that within a number of months we had decided that the UK was the right destination for us.
Shall we talk a little bit about TechNation and an accelerator that we talked to this week?
Yes, I think that'll be good.
So only yesterday, Chris and I were on a call with TechNation talking about what else could we do with AI? Could we actually encourage more startups? Now, I've been an assessor for the AI startups that have gone into TechNation for the last 4 years to help them have the mentoring, to help them have the access to finance, to help to make sure they can scale up their business plans. And that's been actually a very successful program now in year 4, and we were talking about how does that progress. And the UK actually is very strong in areas like AI, and we can see that in the numbers, the investment numbers from a venture capital point of view, from a relative UK compared to other countries in Europe point of view, but also from the inward investment point of view as well. And I think what we were talking about was, can we take this onto another level, like applied AI or deep tech in a different way? And I think it was an example of what we do.
And I think it's quite interesting to talk about TechNation and what they do, because the Applied AI program is one program amongst probably a dozen or so different programs that they have. And several of them focus on specific areas of technology. So there's one on fintech, one on cybersecurity, AI, and also net zero, really focusing on the clean growth agenda, trying to help UK-based companies to grow, find routes to market, and to address problems and issues in the clean growth space. I think the other thing that TechNation does is they produce a number of reports, but the reports are very useful in terms of getting a snapshot of what's going on in UK tech at any particular time. They also work across the whole of the UK through their regional partners to help companies based either in Manchester or Middlesbrough or London or wherever in the UK to be successful. So helping them find routes to market, helping them to find funding sources, and ultimately to think about export opportunities. And hence, because they are also supporting that area, we have a lot of overlap and a lot of collaboration with TechNation. And thinking about growth more generally, Mike, if we think about what what's going to be happening in the next year or two in terms of technology, and how is that going to impact on growth? Because we hear lots of press reports saying that technology could be the future for the economy, but of course the way that we use technology is dependent on the way that companies are operating in the UK and how they choose to take their technology to market.
Well, I think we're going to see lots of areas of technology growth, and clearly we've come out of a pandemic when people have been locked in their bedrooms, making Zoom calls everywhere. But actually, as they come out of their bedrooms, we can see lots of interest in several sectors. One of the things I did last October was to launch the third FinTech directory, Health Tech directory, I mean to say, Health Tech directory, looking at digital health. And we've seen during the pandemic lots of people changing within the National Health Service and also in health provision to more digital online techniques. So we can see that almost as a boom sector where people are saying, if I can't see my GP, I need video calls, I need to have queuing systems, I need to have transfer of data, I need lots of systems that help me work in a digital world. And that third directory is the third annual directory we've issued in the last 3 years. Quite simply evidence that the NHS is trying different approaches to digital health, online care, new approaches to social care. And I think that will continue to grow as we have in some countries like the UK an ageing population. We have a need to optimise and transform health and social care services. And we have had, since the first directory was published 3 years ago, lots of inbound interest from international investors and also other countries interested in the directory. So they're looking at the directory for solutions that they could take from the UK with the credibility of the UK and take into other countries. It's opened up some combinations where some startups combine with others because they can see complementary capabilities that are useful. And you often get that in accelerators where the companies sometimes come together because they see themselves as being complementary or having additional talent pools that could be useful to each other. Other areas of tech we're seeing growing. I think fintech will continue to grow. The City of London is still the biggest stock exchange and financial services centre in Europe. And a lot of the powerful AI and computing capabilities are driving fintech to another level. We can see in the areas around net zero and clean growth, lots of interest. Some of those areas were to the fore at COP26 in Glasgow, but actually when we look at COP27, that's just taken place late last year in Sharm el Sheikh, a lot more solutions come to the fore. So it wasn't just about the science of climate change, it was much more about the solutions for climate change. We can see also in areas like green finance, that pulling in a lot more investment into the UK, but also looking at new solutions which are linked to net zero in some cases, or linked towards non-fossil fuel production, whether it be hydrogen, whether it be carbon capture, new solutions emerging. And I think powering all this is probably some of our strong university sector. Shall we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yes, and just in passing, you were talking a little bit, Mike, about the importance of AI and also digital health. One of the initiatives that has been funded by UK Research and Innovation through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund is a series of initiatives, a series of challenges focusing on the application of AI and other digital technologies to healthcare. So for companies that want to explore that area, there are lots of opportunities to collaborate together and with universities. And specifically in universities, I think in AI, again, we have seen the creation following the AI deal. It started the kind of surge of activity in AI a few years ago. There are 16 separate centres for doctoral training in artificial intelligence, covering all sorts of different areas. And in addition to that, the national facility, the Alan Turing Institute, which many of you will be familiar with, focuses on collaboration with universities and with companies. And in particular, they have a relationship with 13 separate universities in the UK and many more overseas.
And the Alan Turing Institute also got a conference in early March, AI 2023, and was speaking to them earlier on today about how could they give an international flavour to that. I mean, some of the speakers they've chosen already are talking about how AI is coming out of the research community into being more applied, but they have seen the announcement from the EU this week of 200 million euros, I think the figure was, just in AI. AI for health, AI for manufacturing, AI for smart cities, maybe AI for something else. So the EU are putting lots of money into that area. Why not have international speakers at their event? But I think the powerhouse that we have in the UK universities actually is really strong in terms of talent, and that often is a key driver that pulls talent to the UK. It is often a source of collaboration, but also in some cases a source of research funding for innovation that feeds accelerators and startups. So we're blessed with having a strong university sector, probably more top 10 universities in Europe than anywhere else in Europe.
And I think this, as you mentioned, Mike, this is a very strong driver for international businesses to come to the UK, to develop those relationships with universities, to access some of those funding mechanisms that we talked about. But I think overall it's about talent. I've spoken to many companies from, say, North America who've said actually the cost of data scientists and AI specialists in Silicon Valley is almost prohibitive for them to grow at the rate that they wish to. So many of those have considered and have moved forward with setting up R&D facilities in the UK to access that talent pool. And I think if we look at collaboration between the UK and India, there are lots of good examples of Indian companies who have established in the UK to grow the business internationally, but also to access that talent pool in the UK. So I think there are lots more opportunities around collaboration between nations.
Shall I say a bit more about India?
Yes,
India?
Yes.
So I was at the Bangalore Tech Summit in November, and it was just really impressive, the startup community that I saw there. And one of the reasons to be there was to understand, could startups in India work with startups in the UK? And I think there's some work in train now to see if we can set up stronger innovation bridges. That might be done with some of the leading Indian tech leaders. So we have talked to recently companies like Wipro and Tech Mahindra and Tata and others. And I think there's plenty of room for that Anglo-Indian collaboration with some of the big IT companies. There's also a need actually to exchange knowledge between the UK and India in some areas, not just about finance, not just about technology, but in areas like 5G. For example, 5G only launched in India in October. It launched 3-4 years ago here in the UK. And therefore, is there some knowledge exchange that would help in that area? There's also a need, I think, to think about systems integrators. Who are the leading systems integrators? There are lots of really strong software companies in India that could be really strong systems integrators over here. Some of them have a presence already, but not necessarily scaled up to actually serve all the operators or the whole needs of the IT community. But we can see a rise in interest in that area. Some of them, as leading software houses, serve the City of London already. So it's not too ridiculous to imagine some pivot into other sectors if they wish to do that. We also see a lot of interest in areas like electric vehicles. And how do you roll out electric vehicles? You know, that's an engineering challenge, but it's also a physical challenge. You know, how do you get charging points around the country? Not just in India, not just in the UK, but anywhere. You know, actually some of the skills in that area are still in short supply. How do you then make sure the amount of cars and the charging mechanisms relate to the charging positions that exist? How do you connect to the charging posts so that you know that they're vacant to park your car to charge it? How do you make sure the billing works routinely? So there are lots of practical issues in that whole electric vehicle charging area that still need some attention, not just in the UK, not just in India, but right across Europe. And there was some interest in India in that area as well. I think we can also see the traditional university-to-university links, they could be strengthened. Some of that already has some sign of movement in that positive direction.
And if we think more broadly about international collaboration, we talked a little bit about India, but are there examples that you could think of from any market around the world between the UK and another country where things have worked particularly well, either in AI or in a different technology subsector?
So between the UK and Australia, some 3 years ago, we put in place a UK-Australia space bridge that led towards other collaboration areas, including defence and quantum and software interests. But the space bridge actually led towards exchange of knowledge, but also exchange of projects and some funding, and I think that will continue. I think beyond the Australia example, historically we've had strong links to many Commonwealth countries. We've mentioned India already and Australia, but actually the links to Canada are really strong in quite a few areas of technology. I went to Canada in spring last year and talked directly to the Royal Academy of Engineering in Canada and said, which area would you prefer to collaborate in? You know, future telecoms such as 6G, space, or AI? He said, well, we're already collaborating on AI. I think we would say satellite. I said, well, why satellite ahead of 6G? He said 70% of the Canadian landmass has no telecoms coverage. It's obvious. We need to collaborate on space to make sure we can reach the Canadians that are currently underserved with telecoms. And then we might look at 6G after that. But there was an interest in having some more Anglo-Canadian space interests. In other parts of the world, clearly we have, as DIT, offices in most of the embassies in the world, and those offices could include trade officers, they could include science and innovation officers. You've been to quite a few of them in Latin America. Do you want to bring out some Latin American examples?
Yeah, so I suppose about 5 or 6 years ago we thought it might be interesting to look in a bit more detail in Latin America, because there are many companies that originate from markets like Brazil, Argentina or Colombia that are interested in internationalizing, but traditionally haven't necessarily come to the UK. So for obvious language reasons, they have gone typically to Portugal or to Spain, and sometimes that's worked out, but sometimes they felt that they have missed the opportunity a little bit. So we had a dedicated initiative to look at doing more business to help more companies come from Latin America to the UK. And so at one stage, I think I visited Uruguay, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, and even Costa Rica. When I got to Costa Rica, people said, "Oh, so you finished up with the holiday?" No, I was there doing business, and in fact meeting the Ministerial Department for Transport in Costa Rica and helping a UK company to do business there. So I think after doing this for a few years, we recognized that a lot of those Latin American companies actually fitted very well to the UK and have started to come. And in fact, I think in the last London Tech Week, we had a delegation of something like 90 Latin American companies. So you can see that that has really gone from strength to strength. One other point, you mentioned Canada, Mike. I think Canada is a very interesting example, and I have been involved also last week with an initiative which is around the Canadian Technology Accelerator Program, which runs in London. This is a program they've run several times before, but not quite on this scale. And they asked me to be a panelist to help to shortlist the number of companies. And they went from, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 companies down to a much smaller number, which will be the companies that will come across. And spend, I think, somewhere between 6 and 12 months in London, beginning to engage with customers, look for funding, and to go to the next part of their growth. I think there's no real reason why we couldn't envisage doing this with some other key markets around the world, and one would think perhaps of doing something like that in India, or with Indian partners.
Well, I think you make a good point, but I think these are kind of innovation bridges.
Yes.
And with any bridge, you need to have a really strong pair of pillars at either end of the bridge. You also need to have plenty of people crossing the bridge in both directions. And I think between the UK and India, I think there's a strong case for an innovation bridge. I think it's also true that we look at the number of accelerators that we have in the UK, and some of them could be a very strong UK anchor to a bridge, because not everybody wants to be in London. Not everybody wants to be kind of southeast centric. Some want the skills that may be more plentiful in Bristol or Cambridge or Edinburgh or somewhere else.
And I think this kind of leads us to another topic that we wanted to talk about this evening. Thinking about accelerators, one of the sectors that has been particularly strong for accelerator activity in the UK is cybersecurity. And interestingly, you say that not all companies want to come to London. In cybersecurity, much of the activity is outside of London. So one of the most successful accelerator activities, which has been managed by the National Cybersecurity Centre in collaboration with DCMS and with other partners, notably Plexel, has operated from Cheltenham for obvious reasons. That's where GCHQ is located. But more recently, Manchester has very much evolved as a centre for cybersecurity. And in fact, the National Cybersecurity Centre, GCHQ, has its second main location in Manchester. And that has been set up as being not quite an open door, but certainly a much easier location for early stage companies to engage with GCHQ and NCSC. So I think there are lots of examples of helping companies to go to explore opportunities in other parts of the UK, and that is replicated in Scotland and Wales, and particularly in Northern Ireland for cyber, as after Cheltenham and Manchester, Belfast is the other really strong centre of cybersecurity activity. partly because of the university, and this is a sort of circular discussion as we come back and say the universities are very much an essential part of this ecosystem. But, Mike, from your point of view, thinking about cyber then, how would you describe the cyber environment at the moment? What would you consider to be the greatest threats, the things we need to worry about, keep an eye on?
So I'd start with e-commerce. I mean, clearly e-commerce is booming, whether it's business to business or business to consumer. And therefore people want to make sure that the goods they've ordered come to them, not something fraudulent happening along the way, or mistaken identity or stolen goods. So there's a lot of activity around making sure that the right level of cybersecurity applies to those e-commerce transactions. But if you imagine if you're in the City of London and you're handling stocks and shares that are traded every second or microsecond, that really puts pressure on the cybersecurity available with time in mind. And actually the UK has some pretty good strengths at looking at timing and positioning, minimising fraud, minimising the risk. And I think the cybersecurity label sometimes comes across as a bit technocratic, but if you think about the usage side of cybersecurity, there are lots of skills in the UK. I think the examples you gave of Plexon and Belfast in particular, you know, they have some really strong capability in those areas. But we also find a lot of interesting international investors look to the UK and some of those varied skills that we have here. Some of the capability in GCHQ might be more for protecting the nation, but actually some of the technocrats in there have done a lot more than just that. So things like identity management, face recognition, capability to add value to make sure the right person is transacting rather than the wrong person is transacting, or the right person gets the right delivery at the right time. I think some of the areas around timing are quite important as well. I'm involved with the National Physical Laboratory and the National Timing Programme, which is looking at atomic clocks and high precision timing. That will play into the capability into cybersecurity. I'm also on the National Quantum Technology Programme, which is a major programme looking at different areas of quantum technology. But things like quantum sensing and quantum timing will play a part into cybersecurity. So we've got a pipeline. It's not just applications today, it's a pipeline for the future. Quantum computers are a few years away, but actually we can already see in telecoms quantum key distribution playing a key part to make sure that the data is protected. We can also see that there's the beginning of people thinking about quantum aware networks, and I'm sure at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona we'll hear more about that. That quantum roadmap is likely to have several elements to it and not all be delivered this year, but certainly timing and sensing are high profile now, quantum aware is emerging, quantum computing to follow. And I riff on that because I think they are key ingredients for the future cybersecurity.
So that takes us nicely to thinking about future trends, and clearly quantum computing, quantum technologies more broadly are very much part of that, and we're fortunate in the UK to have had a long-standing national quantum programme, which involves many universities with hubs in places like Birmingham and Glasgow and Oxford and York for the areas that you just talked about, Mike. But in terms of the impact of, let's focus on quantum computing perhaps, thinking about that, how is that going to impact the businesses and organisations that we have in the room this evening? And what will be the first signs that we will see of quantum computing really becoming an age?
Well, I think the fact is that we have the talent to deliver that. So I think the talent is the reason we're having the discussion. I think the innovation flow will create value. So I think in terms of looking at an area of interest, you start to look for value where people can invest or collaborate or even work on a given subject. I think the people tonight who are here, we haven't sort of said who you all are, but I think you may have different interests as to how some of these technologies could be applied in different sectors, how it could be taken as a technology into another market, not just the UK itself. One of the things I often look for in any technology is, will it scale? And, you know, coming from the mobile phone industry by way of background, you know, that's the biggest thing that's scaled everywhere for the last 30 years. But some of these new areas might scale more than mobile phones going forward. We can see lots of opportunities coming from the technology. And the fact is that we've got a really strong university base that we can build on, and that's a key ingredient within the talent mix. The accelerators really help take it onto another level. Scaling up internationally is something we have to do because the UK is a small nation compared to many. But the fact is we've got that talent and research base to really help us.
Okay. And really just bringing this to a conclusion, as we want to allow plenty of time for discussion, outside of quantum, which we've just talked about, are there other key themes, key areas of technologies that you think will also be very important and have a big impact, not just on the economy, but on society as a whole? And this can fall back to some other things we've talked about with specific examples around AI. But I was thinking, for instance, around technology things like digital twins, for instance, which we can see have a big impact in areas like manufacturing.
Well, I think first of all, we'd all acknowledge that data is a big driver for innovation, but having access to data is key, whether it's for AI or even digital twins. Digital twins are nice in the idea of, in the sense that it takes us beyond simulation to be able to having a compare and contrast approach, which is really helpful from a twinning point of view. However, I think what we can also see is that data and data traffic growth is justifying the investment in 5G. It is the key driver of 5G investment into more advanced high-speed networks, lower latency, because it's opening up new opportunities through that data traffic flow. I think there are some other areas where society as a whole will be affected. Certainly e-commerce as it evolves, I think will change radically. I think we haven't quite seen the full weight of online education yet. The move towards more digital health, I think I've voiced already from a directory point of view, but actually the amount of digital health we get and will get will just increase. I am including wearables in that, I am including monitors in that, I am including support to our own health remotely, but there's a lot more to be done to health. But I think also the roadmap towards Web 3.0 I think is really interesting in terms of, instead of working in a 2D world, how do we begin to work in a 3D world where the web is much more advanced? How do we find services that can be graphically rich? I also like to look to see how satellites and drones are moving, because I think looking at the world from above, we can actually see a lot of information about the home we live in, the industrial estate we're on, the farming land we may be on, tourist destinations. We can see a lot more from above than we could 2 years ago, and that's only going to increase. And that's why the 3D dimension becomes quite important. How can we then not just look at it, but measure it, so that from a 3D point of view we can identify the plot of land, perhaps as a successor to the Common Agricultural Policy. Right. How can we identify interesting estates that we may want to buy or invest in? How do we identify things that are changing that affect us in terms of climate change, flooding, deforestation? How do we minimize the risk to us from climate change? Some of those big birds in the sky, whether it's satellites or drones, will do an awful lot. And if I link that to the digital world that I just said, I think there are huge opportunities there. But hopefully we've stimulated a few questions as well.
And on that positive note, I think we'll bring the formal part of our discussion to an end, but would really like to open this up now to questions. I hope there are plenty of questions around the table, because Mike and I are very much here to answer and respond to these questions.
Lovely. No, thank you very much. While it was a short conversation, I think it touched on so many topics: quantum, 6G, drones, AI, digital health, and obviously Britain's place in it, the university system working with other countries. So as Chris said, I think there are just so many things that I'm sure which you would like to ask, which are playing on your minds. We'll definitely open it up for questions now. Just a couple things before that. Right after the Q&A, Subhash will come up and talk a little bit more about Digital Tuesday, Tech Tuesday, the initiative, and how it's going to going further. And the second thing is that there are a lot of people for introduction. So maybe a good way to do this would be, other than the little bit of wine, etc. later, the other good way to do this, anyone who's wants to ask a question, if they could just briefly introduce themselves, what they're doing, so that it provides both of them context also in terms of when they are looking to answer the question. So please, it's open, and we'll do this informally, so I'm not going to moderate questions, etc. Fastest finger first, whoever raises their hand. Please.
Right at the back, let's
have it go first. Maybe you want me to kind of, or you could?
Yeah, no, please do.
Okay, yeah, so right at the back.
Yeah, so maybe I can go first. Hi, I'm Kaushik. I was at Stripe, the payments company, until last week as head of product. Before that, I was at Facebook as head of product, both in London. I'm going to be purposely a little bit provocative because otherwise. So if you look at like the UK tech ecosystem, I think there's a few realities. Right? One is that like when it comes to sciencey things like biotech, AI research, like even if you look at AI, like the UK doesn't produce ChatGPT, it produces DeepMind, which then gets bought out by a US company. So it does things like AGI. The UK does a lot of services, but the UK doesn't do very good product companies. And one of the things you also mentioned is that a lot of US companies are hiring in the UK and setting up R&D centers because of cost, which is true. Actually, wages in the UK are abysmal. So if you think of like the best tech talent in my opinion for like product companies in data science, ML engineering, all of those kinds of things where like the top tier talent is actually going to the Bay Area because they can get paid $500,000, whereas here they get paid $100K and then pay 45% tax on that. And whereas they could go to Seattle, pay 18% and get paid $500,000 on that. And which is what is happening, like even at Facebook, for example, there are 10,000 people here. And we had this term, we used to call them the L1 tourists, and they would come here for a year and then they would go to Seattle. And there are thousands of engineers like this that have left the UK. And these are all like the top tier engineers. So how do we think of like the UK as like a tech nation, as a top tier tech nation, versus like being as a feeder to the Bay Area?
He was certainly not joking about the price.
Yeah, I wasn't joking about the price. This is what Jacob's rules, I presume. So,
Absolutely. Please.
Okay, let me start, and then I'm sure Mike will have some thoughts. I think if you go back 10 or 15 years, I think that was much more the case. I think these days there are many more UK companies that do begin to scale and ultimately to grow, and to grow internationally. Darktrace, for instance, is a very good example of a...
Sorry, which one? Darktrace.
Darktrace,
Right.
as a cyber company.
Right.
That has established its own presence internationally. I think the difference between the UK and perhaps other countries in the European region where that's also been a feature, so you talk to French companies and they get acquired by a US multinational, there is now a history of serial entrepreneurship in the UK, and therefore entrepreneurs that have been successful for their first, second, third company now have got a very much better idea of what it takes to take that company and to grow it on an international scale. We talked a little bit about the Tech Nation programs. They are all designed to grow that next generation of global companies. And in fact, there is a program within Tech Nation which is called Future 50. It is designed to find the next generation of unicorns. And in fact, they've gone way beyond the 50 companies they've supported. And I think the statistics are borne out because there are now, I think, more than 130 unicorns in the UK. That is more than Germany and France and I think Israel put together.
Right.
So I think things are changing, and I think it does depend a little bit on the area. And of course, companies from the Bay Area will be always interested in tech in the UK. But I think there could be a yo-yo effect as well. I have come across quite a lot of people from the UK who've gone to the Bay Area and said, hey, this is great for a while, and then said, actually, this is not the place I want to live forever. It's too expensive.
Right. I appreciate that. I think, I think the question was really more around, it wasn't really about Europe as much. I do agree. Like, I think I would place like the UK as number 2 after the US. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah,
Lovely. Yeah.
Hi, my Bhushan Patil from Tech Mahindra. You mentioned the company. Thank you. I look after our network business outside of when we talked about 5G and 6G. The question I have is when telcos haven't really made money out of 5G, how relevant it is to kind of start talking 6G at this stage?
I'm actually chairing a conference on why 6G next month at the IET. I think the answer is not clear yet, but I think the real point is that if you're investing in capital-intensive networks, you need long-term planning. So I think there's a difference between doing the research and doing the investment. In the case of 5G, those that are making money have done it at scale in some countries in North America and Northeast Asia. And they've also been driven by strategies from those countries that are quite apparent. So in the case of USA, for example, they'd already decided on not investing so much in the earlier generations and making more with 5G. But they're able to do that at a scale that we do not see in Europe. So there are only really 3 large operators in USA. They are highly profitable compared to most operators globally, so they have a different market at scale. In the case of Northeast Asia, I would argue Japan, South Korea and China all had top-down government strategies very early on in terms of spectrum allocation, in terms of pushing and promoting 5G, and that's why they were the first to launch and have actually pushed very heavily. In Europe, 5G is not as profitable as it is in North America or Northeast Asia, and it will take some time for it to be equally profitable. Not all markets are in step with one another. We've actually had a more aggressive rollout of, dare I say, 2G and 4G in Europe than in many parts of the world, and as a result, the markets are slightly out of step as well. So I think the real answer to your question is 6G needs to start now because of the long-term R&D. It takes time, rather than the investment, which is in the network pieces. And I think there'll be some debate about when 6G will launch, as opposed to when the research has already started. It has already started because people are saying there are some things we cannot put into 5G because it would knock it over or make it difficult. So I think the logic has to be a bit of separation around research and investment, and then accepting that some markets may have some differences. There are some politics here. Do we keep with a global standard or not? Do we integrate other technologies such as Wi-Fi and satellite or not? Do we keep interoperability across the generations or not? Those factors will have to play out in the research first before we can work out how much investment really goes into 6G overall. There's a long answer. Happy to take other detailed final.
I get your point. I mean, we do a great work, a lot of work with the newest operator in Japan. So I don't know whether Japan companies are making money on 5G because but that's not the point. I think
not yet really.
correct. So that's where the point is, because telcos are changing, and maybe 10 years from now the telcos won't be telcos beyond pipe, because the way Facebooks and Googles and AWS and so that's the reason I'm asking whether this technology really is going.
I think in 10 years we'll have a variety of players that aren't necessarily telcos as we know them today. So the role of the internet will certainly increase and is increasing now, and what the internet players do will have a bearing on this. It also takes into account issues that should it be country by country driven as opposed to globally
That's the
driven.
big point.
And I inferred there may not be global standards, but there might be global leaders,
It could
you know,
be.
which actually lead from both the internet side and the telco side. Some of the Wi-Fi community already are suggesting there's no need for 6G at all because they can do it all. Well, you know, do you want to wait and see or not? I don't, you know, I think it's sometimes good to investigate and research. So there's my answer. I think we may have different shapes. It depends on your time horizon as well.
Thank you. We'll go to Param and then come to you, sir. We'll come to you later.
Yeah, hi, I'm Param. I represent the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce in the UK. Amongst the rest of things that we do, we are more interested in helping Indians scale up to expand into the UK, and I'll speak to you separately on it. But from that standpoint, and when we talk of India, UK, the discussion of FTA has to come on the table. What, according to you, could the tech businesses on both the sides expect out of the FTA, which we assume we should have by this summer?
So a free trade agreement is well underway in terms of discussions between the UK and India. The original intention by the former Prime Minister was to have it done by Diwali. I think that was his phrase. The reality is that both sides realised it was just too tight to get it all done by Diwali. The expectation is that some of the barriers to trade are removed. In other words, where there is high import duty, it is reduced, or maybe access to data is addressed. So some of those barriers to trade are reduced, and I think that's in the interest of both countries. Dotting the I's and crossing the T's is what's happening now. I think, Subhash, for a future one of these Tech Tuesdays, you should ask Harjinder Kang, who is leading on those negotiations, to come along and explain it.
Interestingly, I think they were supposed to be here today.
Yeah, okay. So Harjinder Kang is leading for DIT. I've given him some support with some of the missions I've done to India recently. But it should happen this year, and I think this side of the summer is the expectation. I think some of the challenging areas we need to be upfront about. For example, can we open up the UK market to all Indian nationals who want to come and work in the UK or not? And probably the answer is no, we can't. But we could open it up to talented individuals who want to bring an idea, an investment, or an opportunity. And how do you then define that? That's a practical realisation. However, I think we'd like to have more discussions with you on that to see what else we can do now, rather than wait for the new free trade agreement that I'm expecting this year.
Hopefully before next Diwali.
Definitely before next Diwali.
Lovely. Vivek.
Vivek Jam, I head infrastructure for Google for the Europe, Middle East, Africa region, and primarily I was head for global service part of business for Vodafone, so kind of very interesting conversation. Two observations and then one question for you. So, one, I think one of the biggest successes, at least because I was the chief commercial officer at one time, which is one of the leading space low Earth orbit constellations in UK, which got the license and research came out of UK and is now a government UK and stuff. So I think that's an important one. And the other one, of course, you mentioned DeepMind, which is part of Google. And I guess the question I have, and Chris, is the new work with all these entrepreneurs and startups which want to come to UK, is it more because of talent and research and what exists here, or because they want to access the UK market?
It's both. It does depend a little bit on the type of company. So if it is a smaller, younger company, it's often about the access to the market. Because if a product concept works in the UK, then it will easily scale across the European region and beyond. So I think a lot of Indian companies see that the UK represents a really good first point of landing in the region. And of course, the environment to set up and grow a business in the UK is much easier than some other jurisdictions around the rest of the European region. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is that there's already a very good track record of many Indian companies coming to the UK and being very successful. Of course, the large ones that we all know about, but also the small and medium-sized businesses that have grown steadily when they've arrived. But of course, companies get to a certain stage and then they say, actually, we do need to worry about the talent. And I think some companies, even the smaller ones, will have that in their strategy. The fact if they're a bit more tech intensive, the opportunities to do collaborative research with universities or with other companies is an important component. And then ultimately, as they grow to a certain size, the ability to access good data scientists, good software developers, to add to and extend their capability in the European region is a very important factor too.
And to take Kaushik's point further, instead of tech migrating from UK to Bay Area, do you have companies coming from Bay Area into UK to access the market and adjust for talent?
Yes, is a simple answer to that. Both large companies and small and medium-sized companies, and in fact, we've noticed quite a lot of companies from the Bay Area move to other places in the US because of that issue. So they might move to Texas, to Austin is a very popular location, or to smaller cities, perhaps in the Midwest. And I think this is just being extended because, I've talked to some larger US tech companies who have said, we just can't find the people, and the cost is very high as well. And therefore, we want to be accessing other pools of talent. And we know, for instance, in AI, that arguably the UK is number 3 after the US and China from the global AI index that was published, I think, at the beginning of last year. But I think beyond that, it's the recognition that the UK is a very well-established, very strong academic ecosystem, and therefore it's a good opportunity for companies to tap into that too.
I think as we're hosted here at Gale Gates, I should say that I think also the professional services that are available in the UK are really strong. And that's legal, that's financial. I think some of those design advisory areas are really strong. And that often leads towards some companies saying, let's set up a European headquarters here in the UK. Because without those, actually, the headquarters is not so sustainable. That mixture of finance and design and insurance is a strong combination. I'd also say that only yesterday I was talking to a company that is currently manufacturing in China and wants to come back to the UK because partly the uncertainty around China in tech industries, but also because the costs in places like China have gone up So therefore, why not come to somewhere like the UK where maybe it's easier to do business in some ways? It may not be the largest market, China is a huge market, but actually maybe doing things here may make sense for some companies that are looking at the cost mixture, the support mixture. It's not just necessarily the design capability. And I was pleased you mentioned OneWeb earlier on. That is a really strong Anglo-Indian investment at the moment. And it's not just taking the UK technology, it's actually taking collaboration onto another level. When I was in India before the Bangalore Tech Summit, it was also about what is the future of space. And India will be a science superpower in space, there's no doubt about it. But actually by starting working together on things like that, we can do a lot more. But you don't plot precisely the destination up from the moon. The destination of that business might be slightly different depending on what you want to do.
And do we have in UK have all the talent we need, to the point that Prabhat, that we need to get some talent either in research or in academia from outside UK?
I don't think anybody could ever say we have all the talent we need. I think there are some shortages, which is why we never emphasise just London. We may be in London, but there are other parts of the UK. We also emphasise that we are putting in place ingredients such as visa schemes and so on to make it easier for people to come and work in the UK. So there are gaps, but I don't think anybody can precisely answer that question because I think there always will be gaps.
Or in fact, no country can possibly answer that question
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
positive.
Yeah.
Now, thank you very much, Vivek. If we can move to Rajat and then Himanshu, and then we'll move to the
My
man
name is Rajat.
wearing my
I
favorite.
work for Oak North Bank, which is a very proud, UK fintech and a known success story. My question really is, if you go back the last 15 years after the 2008 crisis, we were in a regime of pretty much free money, and with the quantitative easing, etc. A lot of that flowed into startups and the ecosystem, and possibly gave very comfortable runways for lots of tech companies to start up, fail, make losses, and then maybe turn a curve. Now, as we know, the environment's changed significantly. The sort of free money or very cheap money, period's never going to come back in the near future. Do you see that having an impact on some innovation or the amount of runway or capital that tech companies are going to get, and is that something which the government sort of looking to intervene in?
So a couple of things to say. First of all, the UK is the strongest market for venture capital in Europe. So stronger than France, Germany as well. We talked about the unicorns earlier, which is some evidence on that. And I think the last data that I saw said that there was $39.8 billion worth of VC investment in the previous year. So that's one thing. I think also there is a point that's worth making to say that innovation sometimes does better when the money supply is just a little bit restricted. And that is why sometimes you see some fantastic innovation that comes out of parts of Central and Eastern Europe where the ecosystem to support startups is not quite as well developed. And if you compare that to Silicon Valley, well, of course there's plenty of money in Silicon Valley, it's highly competitive, of course. I think UK-based innovation and the startup ecosystem is very strong because it's a balanced amount of money, but a lot of experience with all the serial entrepreneurs, with more than, I think, 400 accelerator programs across the UK, university spin-outs. The whole ecosystem does seem to work very well together. And that's why we see a growing number of very, very successful startups that become unicorns and global corporations ultimately.
I think talent always attracts money, doesn't it? There's got to be a successful market, otherwise it won't, money won't be lent. People will have to try harder for the money if the interest rates go up. But if you don't have the talent in the first place, you've got a bigger problem. And if interest rates go up, actually it goes up pretty well everywhere. So the government's already doing some things to make it easier. It stepped up the government money on research and innovation. Innovate UK, where I sit on the board, spends roughly $1 billion a year. That will continue to flow in terms of innovation into startups. So are we working harder? Yes, we're working harder, but so are the entrepreneurs, and that's just the way of the world, I'm afraid.
Just one other point. There are other organisations which are specifically trying to help this ecosystem. The British Business Bank, for instance, which has collaboration between different funding sources, and that really helps, I think, and takes the funding ecosystem up a level compared to a number of other countries around the West.
And the BCR Innovation Fund and all of that.
Exactly.
Also, export finance when it comes to scaling up internationally. You know, within DIT, export finance is made available under certain conditions where there is British content. So there are some mechanisms. Navigating that is part of what we have to do.
Himanshu, if I may, sorry, we'll come back to you. I'm trying to break out of that cabal there. But we'll come to the edge, which is Himanshu, and then let's move to the front of the table before I come back to you.
Sure, thanks. I'm Himanshu. I must confess right at the start that I have no technology background. I'm a flunky science teacher teaching at a school in South London, which caters to disadvantaged kids. Now my question is all about the area of EdTech, since you mentioned it while you were talking. And the question is that, the pandemic has shown that kids, particularly those from the disadvantaged backgrounds, they have suffered the most, unlike students who went to other schools. Now, the thing which has actually happened to them is their social and emotional skills have really sort of gone into a time warp. So these kids have sort of gone into a shell, if I may use the word. I used to work for that organization at one point in time. So my question to you is, can you see a future where technology can be used to sort of build up the collaboration skills, the compassion skills, things like that? I mean, you talked about networking. What's happening around this table and what happened earlier on today is something, it's a skill which we build up through our corporate sort of experience. But kids who are, sort of stuck away or who are marginalized, they don't have access to do this. And all they use these things for is to look at TikTok.
Yeah.
Nothing else. Okay. Any views?
Yes. So I think definitely there are some initiatives in the UK that are trying to help that. So we talked about Tech Nation before. They have a program, the most recent program, which is designed to help people who've got great ideas to, but don't have the background at all. So people from a disadvantaged background who are just not necessarily that well versed in knowing how to put a business proposition together, but have just got brilliant vision, brilliant innovation. So that's one program. There's an accelerator which is based in London, which is called Hatch. They also support companies that have had a difficult time or not necessarily in the focal point of the area that other investors would invest in. And there are specific other programs which are designed to help people to gain the skills that they need. So that exists in cybersecurity, for instance. But I think coming back to your point about how can EdTech help here, if we look at the UK as a whole, there are some clear centres of expertise in educational technology, and it is quite transformational in terms of how it can improve the way that young people engage with the education sector. So Sheffield is by far and away the biggest centre outside of London for educational tech. There are specific funds that are designed to help EdTech companies there. And also, if you go along to the key trade show in the sector, which is BET, which takes place every January, you will see a lot of these new ideas being showcased. So yes, there's a lot going on.
Can we just go a bit further? First of all, BET's in March this year.
Sorry, March.
Yes, it's a bit later. But I think because we deal with trade, we don't do so much in schools. What we do is support the educational sector to go overseas or attract inward investment, whether it's primary, secondary or tertiary education. But I think what we can see is that online education, I think, is changing because of the COVID activity, because of lifelong learning, because of the need to develop skills. But you're pointing to a societal issue, which is perhaps where, and my mother is a teacher, but where when teaching in a classroom, I'm afraid the attention span is not as good as it used to be. And that really then points to, well, what is done in the classroom? Can the syllabus change to be more entertaining and engaging? And actually technology can help in that area. So the gamification of learning, for example, not in a solo way, but in a multiplayer way. If you think also about some of the other things that do happen in schools, such as in the UK sports activities, if that doesn't exist, then maybe people will revert back to looking at the screen all the time and social media. I think there needs to be a balanced portfolio in schools which is about making the lessons interesting, collaborative, but also entertaining in the way we did enjoy it. But it needs a longer term view where the syllabus needs to be thought about. I think some of the kids who do look at smartphones and social media are frankly bored with education as it's written today. Rote learning would not come back into the UK very quickly, but actually some of the approaches to collaborative learning could be encouraged. It was interesting today, I was at an event looking at biodiversity, the science of biodiversity. So do we value the plants? Are we thinking about the species that are no longer with us, the 2% we've lost in the last 20 years in the UK, or the 1,000 species at risk globally? If we don't have kids able to go out on field trips because of risk assessment, they're not going to learn about these things. So make the education entertaining and interesting from the start, as opposed to needing excuses to look at the screen, such as the mobile phone all the time. So I think, you know, a collaborative approach, but also a varied approach, I think is needed. My kids were sporty or musical. They were always in big groups, and that's how they learned to collaborate, through sport and music. But others might need to do it differently.
Oh, thank you very much. No, it's actually very interesting. Tech and technology can either, you know, increase the digital divide or bridge it. And in fact, the word you mentioned, compassion, is often used to actually be the one quality which will keep humans apart from AI or technology. So let's see how that goes. Okay, we've got a time for maximum 3 questions more. I first want to see whether there's someone at the head of this table. So there are 2 of them. So 1, 2, and Shubhanga. 3 questions more, and then we'll give the gentleman some rest after that.
Right. So it's not actually a question, just something to add for Chris. My name is Simon Yard. I'm from Innovate UK, KTN, a non-governmental support agency in the UK. Just to add to the thing about accessibility and help, I just wanted to add to Chris's point about the different incubators. There is actually an Innovate UK specific programme in their diversity and inclusivity activity where they target underrepresented groups in the innovation space, and they have done several programmes looking at people from underprivileged backgrounds. So there is direct access to £50,000 of funding, help to develop their business idea, and they're looking at youth, people from lower social demographics, looking at women, looking at underrepresented areas. So there is a constant, really good stream of innovation funding coming directly from the government, where they have no want to own a bit of your property, there's no profit share, no nothing. The government wants to invest in people. So those programs are out there, and they are really driving those forward. So I just wanted to mention those as well.
That was valuable. Thanks, Sam. Peter?
Yeah, right. Sridhar. So we run a global payments marketplace. And interestingly, our presence also kind of global. We are in UK, we have Canada presence, Peru presence, India presence, which all we talked about. Now focusing on the trade part, which is for any trade to flourish, there are 3 components like capital, labor, but also political and legal structure is one of the key. I think there are lots of stalwarts here about technology, science and all, so I leave that. Focusing on the legal part, how is DIT, or in general anyway, enabling companies within UK or outside to come either transact on companies like buying and mergers, acquisitions, or investment? Easier way to do things. I have special interest in this because we are trying to set up offices here and there and hopefully buy some companies from outside. So it'll be good to, and I also think UK is one of the biggest differentiation is legal system. And how is the IT helping take the differentiation as a multiplying factor?
So a couple of points. Firstly, I think UK is perceived as one of the easiest places to set up a business. The UK legal system is much easier to navigate for companies than many other parts of the world. DIT works with a long list of trusted partners. We publish an investment support directory that helps companies to find the right kinds of partners, be they law firms. And in fact, this morning I was talking to an Australian law firm who is trying to help companies go in both directions, and particularly around some of those regulatory issues, and trying to make sure that there are no barriers to do trade between Australia and the UK in that respect. So there are lots of examples of how we help, but each is on a case-by-case basis. Right.
So the Chancellor for the UK government announced in November that he wanted Sir Patrick Vallance, the government chief scientist, to look at how could we deregulate areas that might release innovation quickly. Sir Patrick Vallance is the government chief scientist. You may have seen him on TV during the pandemic. He is my dotted line boss. He is the guy I speak to every Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock with the other CSAs. He's looking at 3 sectors, January, February, March, to report February, March, April, respectively. He's looking at digital and AI to report in February. He's looking at issues around health and life sciences to report in March. And he's looking at energy and net zero in April. And the purpose of doing that is to really try and release some of the innovation by deregulating certain things. So finding low-hanging fruit that will lead to investment quickly, but also some growth quickly. Now, what he's not going to do is to sweep away all the laws of the land. He's not going to do that. But he's identifying the early opportunities. But in the process, he will indicate to the Chancellor some areas that might need some more help longer term. So what are the low-hanging fruit areas for February, March, April, but also what are the areas to do longer term? And I think that process will release areas of innovation, and you may have some ideas in that area, and we could put them in the pot. We could say, why don't you do this? Because that will create that. Now, sometimes we have to think as government, is that a balanced view, or is it going to distort the market? But some areas of low-hanging fruit which might generate investment quickly and growth are likely to be attractive. So I hope that that's a process that I can describe now, and we could follow up if you wish. There are also other interests to try and make sure we remove regulation that really is in the way of investment. So irrespective of the process I've just described, there are forces within government to try and remove bureaucracy. Again, we can point to some examples if you need it.
Okay. Can I do one thing? I know, Saurav, you've also been raising your hand for a bit now. So could we just have both the questions quickly and keep them short if you don't mind? So then we could have both of those questions to you, gentlemen, and then we'll stop the Q&A.
Really good discussion on tech, application of tech and talent. So my question is more on the UK economy. Okay, so one of the biggest challenges of the economy is productivity. And I'm talking about economic productivity. So we're 20% less productive than US. So given sort of all of these initiatives, where do you see the problem is? Because this has been a conundrum for a significant period of time. We've not really solved that. Is it with adoption of tech? Is it with talent? Or is it even broader? It'd be good to have a view on all that.
That was a multiple choice question. But why don't you quickly have the question and then...
Hi, Shubhanga here. I think closely associated more from a macroeconomic standpoint, right?
And sorry, and sort of just for introduction so that they have context.
I'm with IBM currently, previously with Accenture.
Lovely. Shubhanga, the same.
I work with startups and I'm also an investor largely in the fintech space. My question really is, I think I come from India, and when I kind of look at India over the next 2 decades, there is real opportunity that is presented at a national level. When it comes to growth, we're talking about 10 trillion economy in India. And so there is macroeconomic clarity from a demand perspective in the Indian ecosystem. For a small-time investor like me, how would you present the opportunity over the next 20 years, 25 years, right up to, leading up to my retirement, when I will be actively working for hopefully the UK economy? How should I be looking at the next 25 years for UK?
So both macro questions in a sense, productivity and...
Let me start and then
And he wants to pitch to you.
I'll to mine. So on the productivity issue, I think part of that is the need to adopt more technology more quickly. And in certain sectors you see that goes very, very fast. So in financial services, technology has been adopted to a very great extent. But in certain industries it's a bit slower. And I think this is where technologies like artificial intelligence in all of its forms, but particularly thinking about machine learning, but also things like computer vision, it will be transformational in many, many industries. There was a report that was published, I think about a year or so ago, that said the rate of adoption of AI was not as fast as had been expected in some sectors. There were still some things to do. And I think now there's a very strong emphasis on trying to encourage more businesses, more organisations to adopt AI and the related set of technologies more quickly. If that comes to fruition, a lot of this is being driven by the Office of AI and PCMS, but if that does come to fruition, we will see some step changes in terms of productivity. And already there are many industries that are beginning to look at AI very much in the everyday. In the legal sector, for instance, HR are using AI tools to a much greater degree than ever before. But we need to see this in manufacturing, in energy, and in retail to a greater extent than we have it today. That's a productivity question, I think. And in terms of, if I understood correctly, your question is where should you be investing in the next 20 years? What is going to be the kind of key things to look at? What are the mechanisms? Is that right? Did I get that?
I think I'm looking at what is the vision, if I'm going to deploy my capital between India and UK.
Right.
I have clarity on why I should invest in India.
Okay.
More in terms of like how will the country grow over the next 20 years is not a clarity I have from a UK perspective.
So,
how would you go about it?
So I think there are already identified some key technology areas that will be important for the longer term. So I think I'm sure Mike will have more to say on this, but it includes things like quantum, it includes artificial intelligence, and some areas in life sciences as well. I would look at those areas because that's where the UK government is committed over the very long term. So organisations like UKRI will be pumping money into these areas consistently over the next decade or so. And that will definitely lead to new opportunities, both in terms of investing in startups, but also seeing those startup companies turn into scale-ups and then successful companies internationally. But Mike, I'm sure you've got more to say.
Well, to the first point on productivity, I think it's an adoption issue primarily. And I think we need to take into account scale. And the productivity issue, when you compare the UK to USA, is one of scale. You know, some of the activities in the USA can be scaled up very well across the whole nation of the USA, and I think they have some advantages also in terms of some of the major customers that may deliver that scale in the USA that we do not have. The UK is a smaller country by far than the USA. But I think there will still be more attention on productivity, whether it's capital relief on investments. There will still be more attention on productivity going forward because, frankly, we do not have enough talent to go around. So there will be more government-led attention on productivity going forward. You know, it's been in Treasury's mind for a long time. They've just not fixed it yet. So that'll continue to be given attention. In terms of investment thesis, I tend to look at the opportunity and the risk, and I think the emphasis on just scale, I think it leaves off the table a few issues of risk with India. I think any investment should look at opportunities and the risk. I think the growth prospects for the UK are different in the sense that we are geographically part of Europe. I think also some of the ideas that might spring from Europe could be quite different to the ideas that may spring from somewhere like India. So I think looking at a balanced mixture of opportunity and risk is necessary. Which sector would I invest in? I think that's a bigger question which I'm not sure I should really cover beyond what I've already said. I think there's lots of opportunities with tech where the talent from the UK actually can really help. But I think putting a notion of UK versus India, I don't think is quite right. You know, I think I already gave examples of UK-India collaboration where I think actually playing to mutual strengths or combinational strengths makes more sense than just a UK versus India kind of thesis. And therefore I'd look at how do you combine the best of both rather than necessarily just looking at UK versus India. And that could lead towards some strengths that could lead towards better returns than looking at UK in isolation or India in isolation.
Thank you very much. That was a great way to end this discussion. So for the many years that I've known Subhash, I think I've never yet seen him quiet for such a long period. Let me just stop the discussion here and therefore give him the opportunity to break his wall of silence and come and talk about
Thank you. Thanks for
Tech Tuesdays.
This is the thing I'm probably fear the most. I'm not very good at delivering a speech. I try to sort of keep this as short as possible. First of all, good evening once again, each and everyone out here. Thanks to Dr. Mike Short, CB, Chris Moore, for being part of the panel, and thanks to all the guests out here. Tech Tuesdays stem from the very idea of building a community that ideates, nurtures, and then fosters a free-flow discussion of disruptive technologies which have the potential to impact a billion lives. In the process, it serves to contribute by forming a knowledge platform that disseminates information and builds a borderless hub which is accessible for tech innovations and enthusiasts, as well as startups and innovative companies. In 2016, this guy by the name Matt Mullenweg, who is the founder of WordPress and Tumblr, said, "Technology is best when it brings people together." And that best captures my vision for Tech Tuesdays. This is where you are. I'm very humbled and very pleased to see that so many of my industry colleagues, seniors and friends have come together this evening to support me in this endeavor. Tech Tuesdays, as you all know by now, is a monthly event taking place on the first Tuesdays of every month, where we would obviously spend an hour discussing high-level discussions on technology and innovations. The next event is scheduled on the 7th of February at this very place. I must take a moment to thank my partner, KLN Gates LLP, James Cross, sitting out here. He just took 15 seconds and he didn't mean it. He was sitting out here, I was sitting there, and said, "Hey, look, this is what I want to do. Can you help us?" He took 15 seconds to say, "Yes, let's do it." So thanks to KLN Gates LLP and James and the entire team out here. Last but not the least, I would request each one of you to spread the good word around during the event, which is almost at the end, as well as afterwards. Our Twitter handle is Tech Tuesdays UK. You can see it out here. We've also created a video bite station right outside where we'll invite each one of you to share your thoughts and on Tech Tuesdays. Your comments are highly appreciated, and we'll be sharing it across all the digital touch points that Tech Tuesdays have. Thank you once again, and I request just speak to this person about thanks.
Again.
Thank you once again.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Subhash. Very quickly, just 3 things. First, I think this is probably the first tech conference or discussion or debate in the last 1 year where the word metaverse was not. I was waiting for it, but it came close. Digital twins,
Web 3.0 is close.
Yeah, Web 3. And the moment you said Web 3, okay, fine. Now metaverse, making education more engaging, etc., etc. And in many ways, that in fact reflects, how some of these technologies are sometimes technologies of the day, de jour in that sense. And in many ways now, the technology of the day, and perhaps of this year, is generative AI, with ChatGPT and its various other friends from OpenAI, etc., bringing out some amazing stuff. We did talk a lot, and there was a bunch of discussion around, what will these technologies do, how they work with human beings. Sometimes there are discussions around, will they replace humans, and therefore why are we even building them? And one of the best tweets I saw actually on this was that AI, or you can think of any other technology, even EdTech in many ways, will not replace humans, but humans using AI will replace humans. And so that's where, I think we need to look at technology as something which combines and enhances our strengths. The third thing I wanted to say, before I really thank everyone, is that, I actually have one leg in the UK and one leg in India. And I therefore have this a little bit of a sometimes schizophrenic perspective, in which I can kind of look at the relative strengths. And I absolutely agree. I don't think there are, it's not an or thing. It's an and thing. And that's not only true of UK and India, but it's true of UK and multiple places. And there are certain parts, certain strengths in the UK, which I think where the UK just completely punches above its weight. The university system, for example, I think much less is said about it outside the UK, and much more should be, is something which is, where the UK clearly punches out. So certain technologies like quantum, which was mentioned, nuclear fusion, which along with metaverse today wasn't mentioned, so that was number 2. Okay, but I think a technology like that, and so there's a lot, which we can, and these I think could be the seeds for the discussions over the next Tech Tuesdays. So with that, let me just thank everyone who came here, our 2 distinguished guests for sharing their knowledge, their time, their views. James at KLN Gates for actually hosting this, providing this amazing space. And again, everyone else who came here, thank you very much. Subhash, obviously, for putting this all together. And right now, we can continue this discussion and maybe ask some of the questions which were too provocative for you, to be honest. Outside, help with a few alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks. And the drinks part reminds me of the volunteers, okay, which so Sasha and Anjali, thank you very much for putting all of this together. They were the people who really, kind of made everything happen. So a special round of applause to them. Thank you. Please.